Hello and welcome to another Levelling Up Goals seminar. Today we are hosting this in association with Liverpool John Moores University, and the theme is extending enterprise. And I guess everyone can agree that if different areas of the country are to level up, then the whole enterprise economy, as Lord Young used to call it, is absolutely crucial to achieve this. And I think we want to also particularly look at how young people can become entrepreneurs and get into starting their own businesses, which, to be fair, has happened a lot, certainly over the last 10 or 15 years. Well, to introduce this particular levelling up goal, let's have a word with Justine Greening. I'll introduce the rest of the panel after you've introduced this goal, Justine. Justine, of course, is former Education Secretary, former Transport Secretary and International Development Secretary. This levelling up goal of extending enterprise, just explain in a little bit more detail what it means.
Thanks, Ian. Well, it's a really important levelling up goal because often when we talk about levelling up, and as you said, we talk about how can we create more jobs in particular regions, the implicit question that people are trying to answer is how can we get more inward investment and how can we get employers to take on, more people and grow? But actually, the danger is you really miss this fundamental piece, which is actually people can create opportunity for themselves. And part of growing local economies is about allowing more businesses to set up and flourish. And from my perspective, there's another part of this, which is that levelling up shouldn't be about what government is doing to local communities. It fundamentally should be local communities driving the solutions to how they become more leveled up in and of themselves. And so we wanted to specifically break out this issue of extending enterprise as an explicit levelling up goal. We want to see people creating businesses all over the UK. And as Sharon can talk about really eloquently, and it's going to be great to hear from Ian as well, we want to really help people have the skills and the knowledge and the confidence to be able to know how to do that. And I've often said that I probably had two ambitions when I was, 10 or 11. One was getting to university because I knew that education was core to me being able to make something of myself. But the second thing that I always wanted to do was to start my own business. And for me, that wasn't just about being able to earn money and do well. The reason I wanted to do it especially was because in the town where I was growing up in Rotherham, there was a huge amount of unemployment. And I thought it would be a really important thing to start a company that could help create some jobs and opportunities. And so really for me, bringing new businesses into being, creating them, the ideas that they have, is fundamentally all about levelling up. And I hope today we can have a really interesting discussion about how you can remove the barriers to people being able to do that. And certainly if I go back to my own experience, I'd never met anyone who'd run a business, let alone set one up. I had no idea how to even go about thinking about my ideas because I didn't really know much about business, full stop. So it's about how can we bridge that gap to really allow people who want to do this to not have any barriers getting in the way of them being able to take those ideas and do them, and realize that actually every single business that's employing someone was started by someone somewhere, and it was an idea. And that you can be one of those people that initiate something. And you look at the London Stock Exchange and look at the companies that are on it, and there's a big debate about how few tech companies there are, how many of these businesses almost reflect an economy of the past. Actually, now is the perfect time to almost get a new generation of entrepreneurs, new business people with new ideas, setting up those businesses that can become the FTSE 100 of the future and create that massively strong economy that itself then creates more opportunities.
Well, there's a lot to get our teeth into from what Justine has said there. Let me introduce the panel to you. Sharon Davis is Chief Executive of Young Enterprise. She's a graduate of Liverpool John Moores University. She's Chief Executive at Young Enterprise. And Sharon, do you just want to spend 90 seconds or 2 minutes just explaining what Young Enterprise is and what your role is?
We're a national and financial education charity. We've been going since 1963. And our focus, really, our mission, if you like, is that every young person gets the opportunity to learn to earn and manage their money, build that enterprising mindset, and make a positive contribution to their community.
Professor Ian Campbell is Vice Chancellor and Chief Executive at Liverpool John Moores University, and Chris Finn is Director of Student Features at Liverpool John Moores University. Student Features, that's a great phrase to have in a job title. Just tell us a little bit about what you do, Chris. Is it what I would have regarded as a careers advisor?
Yes, but in the broader sense. So these days, we want to be very sophisticated about what it actually takes to launch our graduates on fantastic early careers. So as well as having clarity, we want to develop their skills, their transferable skills, and we do have a big emphasis on enterprise. So, we're very clear that self-employment is a great route to employment, and all the fundamental skills of entrepreneurship are highly transferable. And I'm pleased to say within the department, we have quite an acclaimed startup hub that's been running now for almost 20 years. So we've had a lot of experience in supporting our students and graduates to take the leap to self-employment.
Well, let's start by talking about maybe what universities can do to help people not just get into the world of employment, but actually start their own businesses. I'll come back to you for a bit more on that in a moment, Chris. But the Liverpool area, Ian, is actually regarded as quite a beacon of enterprise in some ways. Liverpool has a reputation for all sorts of different things, but I think in terms of creating new jobs, creating new businesses, it actually has a really good track record. How does your university fit into that, and what do you regard as your role as a university to encourage enterprise in the region?
Liverpool John Moores University, its purpose is about making a difference to people's lives, and actually from whether that be our students, but also it relates to the communities that we serve in Liverpool and the Liverpool City region. And part of that is what we are completely committed to social mobility and ensuring that everybody has the ability to, if you like, be able to have the same life chances that everybody else has. And from our perspective, extending enterprise within Liverpool and the Liverpool City region is vitally important, and how we partner with organisations within Liverpool and the City region has been vitally important to us over time. So we were very much early adopters of the concept of enterprise within the university, and the concept of startups and actually growing businesses was a very important part of what we were about. And that hasn't changed since 2003. And so everything that we do in our curriculum, and indeed outside our curriculum, is designed to give our students the skills and attributes that they get as they go through their time at Liverpool John Moores, in order to then be able to go on to whatever it is that they want to do. And in this day and age, given the flexibility of employment and the ways and things that are likely to occur as we move forward out of the pandemic, we think that's vitally important. So the work that Chris has been doing as our Director of Student Futures is vitally important within that. But essentially, you're quite right. Liverpool has been great at actually creating jobs in this enterprise space, and that's what's important to us as we move forward. Thank you.
Chris, let's expand a little bit on that, because I suspect different universities have different policies, different attitudes towards enterprise. I mean, the private sector, I think, for some people is still regarded as a little bit of a dark thing, for reasons which I've never understood. Because if you don't have an enterprise economy, you don't create the revenues to pay the taxes that everything else depends on. Are there any sort of barriers in students' minds to going into the private sector, creating their own businesses? Do you have to sort of almost be somebody who's an advocate of all of this?
Yes, absolutely. And also to connect our students to advocates. So I think there's a few things. The first is we're hugely invested in social justice and social capital in the university more generally. You know, our students have immense potential, immense ambitions. They don't necessarily have the access to the networks and the experiences and the resources that some of their peers elsewhere in the country do. So to speak to a startup and enterprise in particular, it starts simply with just affirming their potential and giving it a name and celebrating the fact that they can be ideas people, they can be people that translate ideas into action, and that it is absolutely a valid aspiration to go into self-employment and something that absolutely they can do. And that is often as simple as case studies and, again, facilitating those entry to networks. The Liverpool City region is a significant part of our economy, if not the majority part of it, are SMEs, small to medium enterprises. So a key part of that is just our students rubbing shoulders with business owners and SMEs, just to kind of see that in practice. And in this year alone, we've had about 125 funded internships, specifically in SMEs, focused on business recovery, business diversification. And part of that was that insight into this whole sector. Beyond that, there are the more practical things around experience and learning that, you know, often it's about generating ideas, trying them out. They may not work to begin with, but let's refine them. And that's part of the process of a successful venture. And that's not about students failing. That's just them learning and building more robust ideas. So, you know, part of it is creating safe spaces for experimentation. And then we've done a lot of practical stuff around connecting them to funding. We've had an organization called the Bathgate Group have provided seed funding for businesses for a number of years. So yeah, it's a whole connection to affirming their potential, to acknowledging the fact that they may need to experiment and try things out, and that's great. That's how it works. While at the same time offering that just practical entry into relationships and opportunities and funding.
Sharon, of course, it's not just graduates that that can create new businesses. Do you feel that the school system is geared up to informing pupils, students about what enterprise actually is and the opportunities that there are out there to create businesses, even if you have no money, which of course is one of the biggest barriers to entry, as Chris has just said. Even if you have no money, if you've got a good idea, you can probably bring it to fruition with the right advice. Are sort of 14 to 16 year olds or 14 to 18 year olds really geared up with that kind of knowledge when they leave school?
I think the best that we can say is it's patchy. It's really, really patchy, that kind of provision. In some schools, it's really valued, and the connection with community and the opportunity to bring in relatable role models is there, working really closely with voluntary organisations and businesses and universities. And I have to say, I think it starts earlier than that. You mentioned Lord Young before, Lord Young's Enterprise for All report, and he talked really passionately about the 4th R being relevance, of young people being able to apply their learning and make it relevant, make the lessons relevant. And I think one of the things that we do at Young Enterprise, and we work very closely with Lord Young to introduce that, is the 5 challenge. Now that's introduced at the age of 5. It's between 5 and 11. So it's about really looking to introduce those opportunities early on, bring in relevant, relatable role models. So it's not just people on the telly that they see who are just really inaccessible, and the opportunity there to build that social capital, as we know.
Well, let's talk a little bit more about barriers to entry, particularly for young people, but not exclusively. Justine, this is presumably one of the real drawbacks. When you set up this levelling up goal, the barriers to entry for people going into business often are illusory. That people think, well, I haven't got any money, I don't know anyone with money, a bank's never give me money, so then I can't really try this because this isn't for people like me. And that's a really big mistake to make, isn't it?
It's spot on. I can literally remember the discussion I had with my mum in the kitchen when I said I was thinking about setting up a business, and I would have been about 14 or 15, that's something I'd like to do. And my mum said, yeah, but what if you lose all the money and you owe it then? And of course she didn't understand about limited companies and literally I was like, yeah, God, we haven't got any cash to even put on something that might fail. And so in a moment, I kind of set it on one side, and thought, well, I'll do business, but I'll kind of just do it some other way. So the point Sharon just made is absolutely clear. And I think, even when I was at the DFE, there isn't a good enough understanding within education that it's education with a purpose. And that purpose is, amongst other things, allowing young people to get what they need to be able to connect up with opportunity. But if connecting up with opportunity is being able to do my opportunity, then that means them understanding the rudimentaries of how I set up a business. And we're having a bit of a debate about standards in maths and English and what you need potentially to go into university. Well, perhaps one of the challenges is that you come back to maths and make it much, much more relevant for the world that people are actually going to be going into, and it picks up these points that have been made. And I think we really need to make sure that we are not screening out entrepreneurs before they're even leaving school, which is, I actually think, what happens right now. And I think it's a real tragedy, actually, because there's so much of an entrepreneurial spirit out there. And I guess it's a bit like art. Your creativity is often at its peak when you're a young person. You're not bound by the ideas of an outside world that you tend to sort of steadily morph into. So that's the time, I think, to really harness this excitement. And, we can learn from what universities like Liverpool John Moores are doing on looking at that wider person and what they need to be able to take those ideas and then actually get them to work in practice and to get their business off the ground. So from my perspective, Ian, this is completely soluble. It's just a question of will, and it's a question of targeting our efforts where they're needed most.
And Chris, do you find that in your discussions with students that one of the biggest barriers is lack of knowledge of what it means to start a business, and some of the preconceptions that people have about how difficult it is, sort of red tape, regulation, finance, we've already discussed a little bit?
Yes, absolutely. And I just want to really echo the point here that it's about a sense of possibility, and again, kind of connecting to applied learning, and saying that actually, again, all of that knowledge you already have latent there, all the skills you have latent there are sort of transferable. So I think it is about demystification. Self-employment is one of those words or concepts that feels inaccessible and foreign, and you use the phrase "people like me." That's a really important phrase, as much as the screening out, which I do think is there. I think there's also the self-deselection. Oh, people like me don't start a business. And, part of our role is to say, absolutely, people like you start businesses all the time. I think there's a demystification. That's not to remove the fact that there is some basic scaffolding around just getting your business idea tight, making sure you've got something you can take to market, doing market research. There's the fundamentals of starting a business that we can teach and scaffold. I think that bigger piece around absolutely people like you start up businesses all the time. And the beauty of us being a rooted institution is we are in a city region where we're surrounded by people that locally set up businesses for themselves. So the more we can kind of connect to that, and alumni can be incredibly powerful as well, obviously. The more we have people who have gone through the process, who can come back and say, I was exactly like you 5 years ago and I took the leap and it's worked. It's very powerful.
And also, Ian, that there are plenty of examples of 18, 19, 20-year-olds who have started businesses. And I mean, I've interviewed a couple of them who are already millionaires within a couple of years of doing that. Obviously, they're the exceptions. But getting first-hand experience and actually getting people who young people can actually relate to, rather than some sort of gruff 55-year-old entrepreneur who's been there, done that, that's important too. But if you can get younger people who've actually started their own businesses, that probably is a sort of light bulb moment for many students, I would have thought.
it is an absolute light bulb moment, and quite interestingly, we have quite deliberately focused on, if you like, former LJMU students who are working within the city and the city region. For example, down in the Baltic creative area, we have some of our students who have become entrepreneurs, set up their own businesses, and what we're currently doing is making connections with all of those different people who we do think can both mentor and inspire our students as to what actually is possible. Because I have to go back to what Justine and Sharon said earlier on. When I was at school, actually very early on, what I wanted to do, actually, I didn't necessarily want to go to university. I wanted to set up a sweet shop. That's what I wanted to do. But I had no idea how to do it. But I kept telling my mum, that's what I want to do, because there was this corner shop that I kept going to. It never happened. It's still a dream. But actually, at that time, there was nowhere to go to have that sort of conversation, whether it be at school or with anybody else. It just wasn't the way of thinking. And actually, from those days, I've always thought, as I've gone through the journey that I've gone on, within universities, we have a huge role to play when students do get to us who might not be thinking of that. And certainly that is the case with many students who come from first generation, it's their first generation at university, haven't thought about businesses, and yet you can see that they have the skills just by meeting them, that they actually could go on and set up their business, and they just need to be inspired to do so. And as Chris said, have the scaffolding around them to be able to do so. And I think it's so important from a very early age, actually.
And Sharon, the difference between now and when Ian had his sweet shop dream, I had my bookshop dream, Justine had her, I'm not sure what her dream was, but apart from just to set up a business, we now, of course, can set up a business virtually for nothing if we do it on the internet. I mean, it doesn't apply to every kind of business, but if Ian wanted to set up a sweet shop now, he could do it online for pennies, if that. I set up an online political shop, which predominantly sells books, but lots of other things as well. I published a book last year, and somebody said, well, I want to sign copy. How can I get one? So I looked into it and I set up a bespoke shop, cost me absolutely nothing. And I had an 80,000 turnover by the end of last year. So I then invested some of that to do a properly designed shop. Now, that opportunity wasn't available even 10 or 15 years ago. And I wonder how many people realise that if you want to sell something on the internet, you don't have to spend 10, 20, 30,000 pounds on a website. Somebody's already done it for you.
Absolutely. I couldn't agree more. And I think, again, it goes back to that kind of how do you level up? Because there's the kind of infrastructure there, isn't it? It's knowing about things like if you're thinking about a young person setting up and running their own business. So there were over 4,000 16 to 19-year-olds that set up their own company in 2018. That's with Companies House. And yet you still cannot get an under 18 business bank account. So what kind of confusing message does that tell? Serious, because basically what we're saying here is that you can set your own business up, but actually you can't get an under 18 business bank account. That's one thing. The other thing is to talk about one of the things that we do at Young Enterprise. It's really important to teach young people the kind of how do you operate a business online. So understanding the rules around distance selling, GDPR, IP, and also you have to be over 18 to actually set up and run an Etsy or an eBay account. So again, how do we support young people and provide the scaffolding, as Chris and Ian has said, to allow young people to take those risks in a really safe way? Because at the moment we live in a country that says, go ahead and do it, but quite a lot of the systems that sit behind it are not supporting that.
So just to break in there, is there no bank at all in this country that will give a business account to an under 18-year-old?
Not an off-the-shelf one, no. Not that we're aware of. We're not.
But I mean, yeah. That if you are a bank, if there's somebody who works in a bank listening to this, I mean, what a market opportunity! Because I mean, we all know the phrase "get them while they're young." Well, in this area, if there's one bank that starts to do this, and all young entrepreneurs go to that bank, they're going to be with them for life, aren't they?
Absolutely, absolutely. And there's so many young people who are considering side hustles or doing side hustles at the moment. So, I mean, the other thing I would say is go back to what Justine was saying before, was about the importance of financial education. So Justine mentioned to her mum, and her mum said, well, you could easily go into debt. Financial education is so important. So understanding the whole business around risk and reward, deferred gratification, all of those things. So they're really key. And yet, with an under 18 business bank account, we're saying to young people, actually put your personal and your business finances together, because we're not actually set up and geared for you to have a business account for yourself. So I think there's so much more that we could do to support young people to actually set up and run their own businesses.
Justine, we've talked sort of quite generally and with a few specifics thrown in about young people and starting up businesses. But how does this relate to the levelling up agenda? Because do you think that in, shall we say, slightly more well-off parts of the country, that maybe have better school systems that sort of are more attuned to entrepreneurship, is it they that are doing well and other parts of the country are really playing catch up, or how do you see this?
I think there are just some communities, and they often are more privileged ones, that are just more used to setting up businesses. It's not unusual, and actually it's encouraged. And so a lot of this is just simply about a social norm. And even for universities like Liverpool John Moores that do a real focus on this and do it brilliantly, when you look at the fixation, in a sense, almost in government, on earnings, graduate earnings, and of course, if you're just setting up a new business, you're probably taking the least money out of it you can. And therefore, your graduate earnings will be a pittance. It'll look like Liverpool John Moores has completely failed you. Actually, they are churning out these entrepreneurs that are going to underpin not only the Liverpool city region, but probably nationally. So I think it's, Sharon mentioned about the access to a bank account. I think it's about having all of these different pieces of a jigsaw puzzle pointing in the same direction so that you can steadily shift the dial. There isn't a silver bullet to this. And so we have to recognize that it means targeting effort of fantastic organizations like Young Enterprise in the right places, which is exactly what they do. It's about celebrating, frankly, the work that they do, plus Liverpool John Moores on enterprise. And it's about making sure that that's genuinely valued and credited, if you like, in wider society and reflected in government policy. And I come back to education. I do think education needs to really have a more structured engagement with entrepreneurship in schools and finding the time for that. And on these seminars, Ian, we've regularly talked about the fact that as things stand, the school system's so academic that it's squeezing out, if you like, the space for these other vital things that young people need to learn by the time they go into the workplace and think about how they're going to earn a living.
Ian, I saw you nodding there. How do we relate this all to the levelling up agenda?
So for me, it is in the way that we at Liverpool John Moores have been doing for many years, is it's trying to take anybody who comes into our institution and ensuring that any person, no matter who they are able to go on a journey whilst they're with us, so that by the time they leave us, that they do have those skills and attributes and experience that allows them to feel confident enough in order to be able to go out and set up a business or do whatever it is that they want to do in that space. And by doing so, we believe that that contributes absolutely to the levelling up agenda, because what it is doing is it's allowing people to essentially have the opportunity to achieve the same outcomes, particularly, I have to say, from the area that we're located in. And I agree with Justin, it doesn't just go, we're not just talking about Liverpool and the city region, it does go way beyond that for us. But from our perspective, what we see, because most of our students do come from this area, what we know we're doing is by allowing the skills and attributes to be developed alongside their educational programs, we know that we can contribute to the levelling up agenda in a very real way. And one of the great things that's been happening is where we've brought together students from different faculties, for example, in order to design a business or create a business around a particular problem or area that is of interest to them, to then be in a better position to feel, hey, I can do this and I can get out there and actually really make a success of it, alongside our mentoring programs, alongside everything else that we do. And they're just two examples I think that I'd highlight in. But that's how I very much see things at this moment in time from our perspective.
And Chris, do you think that some of the business organisations need to up their game on this? Last night I was Googling sort of 20 things you need to do to start a business. It was actually quite difficult to find websites that just give you sort of saying, well, you need to register with that, you need to, how do you form a company? Now, all these things are out there, but you wonder whether, like the CBI, Federation of Small Businesses, really ought to sort of up their game on their website to try and attract new entrepreneurs. Because again, if you go to the FSB website, for example, and you see lots of helpful information, that will encourage you to join. But I wonder whether that information is easy enough to access at the moment.
So I think, particularly in the region, I think this was referenced before, I think possibly given how significant small to medium enterprise and startups and micro businesses are to the region, actually we have a reasonably sophisticated ecosystem and support structure in the region. I think the way I would come to it is that's very much something of our age, isn't it? That the information is out there. It's someone to navigate you through it, and to make the personal connection to it, and to allow you to mobilize that into action. So I think, interestingly, locally, certainly the support infrastructure is actually quite good. I think it's that personal connection to just again, it's all about navigation. It's about mentorship on some level. It's about facilitation. How do we allow you to make meaning of that and apply that to you personally and translate it into action? I think that's the critical part. And I'd have to, I really have to give credit to the startup hub within my department that does this, because they're very, very good. And I think that's what they're essentially providing, is that personalized navigation along with the encouragement. So I think the information's there. It's just how do we provide that personalized support to make meaning of it?
Sharon, I imagine you have some views on this area as well. Do you think that the information is easy to access, or does there need to be improvements, or is that where you feel that you come in?
Well, I think the current generation, Gen Z, are really, really great self-led learners. I think what we as an ecosystem need to do is make sure we're going to the platforms that they already go to, and make sure that there's information on there. So the likes of TikTok, Instagram. And I'll give you a great example. The Citizens Advice Bureau started providing great financial education on TikTok. So, and what that helps to do is knock out some of the influencers who are talking about crypto or whatever by providing some really meaningful financial education. So I think it's about us coming together and finding out where those places are and working with young people to make sure it's accessible. I would also agree with Chris's point about support. A very, very quick personal example. So I was 19. I was living in Birkenhead, in a bedsit in Birkenhead. I was working in the Quick Save on Dock Road, which I'm sure you will all know. The Quick Save, some of you will remember, was a northern brand. And I had a chance meeting with a youth worker. And literally, he saw me working with these young lads who kept coming into the Quick Save, messing about. And he kept coming back and saying, well, actually, I think you've got some transferable skills. And from there, I took a part-time job and eventually built the confidence to apply to John Moores University. And I was 23 by the time that happened. And so it was that support, that constant support. And it was for me, it was about accessing somebody who invested in me. So I think you can't underestimate the importance of that personalized, accessible, relatable role model.
Let's also go back to the question of access to funding, because I think this is probably the biggest barrier to people starting up businesses at all. I know when I started my business in 1995, and I had very little experience, I kept being told cash flow is king, but I didn't quite understand the importance of it. And looking back, I was absolutely mad to start a business with so little money, which I raised from friends and family. I sold, I believe it or not, I used to own Princess Diana's Audi Cabriolet. So I sold that to finance, give me some capital to start the business. And I think I started altogether with £60,000, which when you're starting with a shop in London, in those days, well, certainly today, would be complete madness. I didn't I thought, well, I'm not going to get money from the bank because I've got nothing to set it against. I didn't know any rich people I could go to sort of put this plan to them. And so I did it on a wing and a prayer. Chris, I imagine that there will be many people out there who just can't imagine where they could raise £1,000, let alone 10,000 or 20 or more, if they don't have the contacts, if they imagine that a bank isn't going to lend them the money. And I think that's the reputation, whether it's deserved or not, that all banks have got now. Where do they go to, and how do you convince them to keep at it?
Yes, and I'd have to say this, I think, is where the harder edge comes into that kind of support and that kind of navigation. So, we will spend, or rather the specialists in my team will spend a lot of time working on business viability. Has it been robustly developed with market research? And there's a really interesting thing in this whole territory of leveling up around the right language and the right format. So how do you put your ideas together in a proposition that will speak the language of potential investment? So absolutely, there is a how do we translate a great idea into the language of investment, but also there is the facilitation to investment. So again, that's an important connection to be made. Again, we have a strong connection to the ecosystem here, and we can offer some orientation to where any new business can go. But equally, we've had the benefit of support for seed funding, and that really helps as well. Just a few little bits and pieces to get the business moving. But again, going back to the viability, that's about a customer base. So one of the things we'll ask is, do you have the start of your black book, your order book? Do you have people in there who are already ready to pay for this product or this service? So I do think that's probably where the harder edge comes into that connection making, that navigation.
Sharon, let's come to you on this. Is access to finance the biggest barrier that you find?
Certainly, I would say in terms of female founders, that's one of the strongest barriers identified in the Rose Review. I think with young people, where we work with them, really just to make sure, as Chris has done, you've done your homework first. So we have schemes called the 5 and the 10 challenge, where they'll literally start an enterprise with £5 and £10. So, and they'll come up with fantastic ideas. So I wouldn't say with young people that necessarily access to finance. I do think that whole attitude to finance and attitude to taking on debt, and what the difference is between good and bad debt, and so that basic understanding of finances underpins quite a lot of choices and attitudes to finances. So I think that really does need. I think there needs to be more work on that, because that impacts, goes back to Justine's example, it impacts on when you go to your family and say, I'm thinking about starting a business. For many working class families, for myself included, my dad would have been horrified at the thought of me starting a business because of his attitude to debt and risk.
Chris.
Yes, I just want to immediately come back on that, because there's a hidden dimension here as well, which we've touched upon a few times, which is quote unquote the bank of mum and dad. So, if you are in those early stages of your career, and it is taking a while for the business to get off the ground, knowing you've got that family support to fall back on, whether that's literal hard-edged investment or whether it's just somewhere to sleep and to eat, it's really critical. So I think probably, you're right to put your finger on this as a key part of the process, that funding and that investment, that recognition that, we do need something to begin with is quite critical.
Ian, do you think that you can actually identify who would be a good entrepreneur? If you had, say, 30, 20-year-olds sat in a room, could you ask them all questions which would identify the ones that you think would actually become a good entrepreneur or not? I'd be interested to hear Sharon's view on this in a moment as well.
Well, I think the way I'd answer that is probably not, actually. I think that you can, as Sharon said, somebody spotted something in Sharon that said you've got a set of transferable skills that may, in their mind, see you be successful in a particular career. From my perspective, what I am always interested in doing is listening to what students say in relation to this whole area. And actually, from that, you can certainly identify attributes that are likely to be of importance as you move forward as an entrepreneur and an interesting enterprise. I can see that. But would I be somebody who could spot that immediately? I don't think I personally would. What I do know is when students have gone through the interactions that they have within our student futures environment, is as a result of that going in front of a panel to discuss their business cases and everything like that, you can certainly then identify those students who have really, for want of a better word, got it at a particular stage in their career. And from my perspective, the other thing that you see, if you see them very early on, you can see how their confidence and self-belief has grown from not even having thought about the possibility of setting up a business into something completely different, in the belief is this is something that I would love to do and give it a go. You can see that for certain. I'm not sure that's answered your question, Ian, but that's where I go with it.
Well, come to you, Justine, now, because what I really meant by that was, I mean, we've talked in other of these seminars about the fact that if women don't get the chances in the workplace, or if people from ethnic minorities don't get the chances that others do, the economy, the country has lost out on a huge pool of talent. And I wonder, it's a bit like Ian Wright and Jamie Vardy, both became incredibly successful Premier League international footballers, but they weren't spotted until they were in their sort of early to mid-20s, which for a footballer is very, very late. And you wonder how many Jamie Vardys and Ian Wrights are being lost in the entrepreneurial world because nobody spotted them like they spotted Sharon. Nobody has tapped them on the shoulder and said, well, have you actually thought about doing this? And here's how.
You're right. And the answer to that is there are tons. I mean, probably hundreds of thousands of people who could have been, millions maybe, brilliant, successful business people who didn't get the chance. And, you know, you look at some of those amazing entrepreneurs and how many of them actually got excluded from school. They didn't quite fit in. They wanted to do their own thing from quite an early age. And instead, you know, that was seen as a bad thing. They had to knuckle down and, you know, get on with things in the classroom. And actually, part of this is that, you know, people often have a quite strong personality that you sort of need to be able to pull a business behind you almost from an early age. And actually, it's recognizing that that comes out quite quickly in people, and we shouldn't stifle it. Instead, we should have an education system that can, I think, really help shape it, and also recognize that people do develop at completely different rates. And it's partly about putting seeds in people's minds. And, you know, Sharon was saying how it was a chance meeting in a way that unlocked her potential or got her on a right track. And, you know, maybe if Ian and I had met somebody who had started a business and could sit us down and talk about it when we were teenagers, our lives could have gone in totally different directions. And
yeah, but we wouldn't be sitting here, Justine.
maybe worse direction. It all went wrong because I went into politics. Yeah. But I think there's this issue about diversity, and it's horses for courses. But also, whilst ever we are in a world where some existing businesses and employers are more close than they should be to that diversity, we also need to recognise that therefore being able to plough your own furrow, do your own thing, is even really more important for some parts of our community. And that's why it also matters.
Sharon, I imagine you've been listening to the last few minutes and thinking, right, give me a chance, your chance now.
I just think that mindset is just so important, really, really important. I don't think I agree with Ian. I don't think you can spot an entrepreneur, but you can certainly spot an enterprising mindset, a growth mindset, or a limited mindset. And I think our job really is to nurture that growth mindset and really get them early. So, and have some really kind of culturally inclusive language. So we're not saying to little girls, stay in your lane, take care, and encouraging the guys, the young lads, to kind of like rip the sides off it. What's wrong? What's the worst that can happen? So being really clear about that. And I think that whole mindset, enterprising mindset, you see that with some of our greatest, Justine was mentioning those young people that perhaps, in school don't see the relevance of those lessons, but their enterprising mindset helps them to problem solve. And actually that problem solving, that initiative, that resourcefulness is key. That's what we need. You need that in the business. I need that in the charity. And that's what I think we need to be nurturing, that enterprising mindset. And I think that then actually, I mean, we know that, don't we? We know that entrepreneurship education, when a graduate goes into a firm, there's lots of research that says that firm will grow. It will benefit, and small firms even more so. So it's not just about an enterprising mindset setting up a business. It actually helps other people's businesses as well.
Do you think you can actually teach entrepreneurship? I get that you can teach business administration, all that sort of thing, but is it not like a natural affinity for chemistry or physics or sport? Don't you have to have a natural affinity to entrepreneurship to be able to really be taught it properly?
No, I think you can create a great environment that enables entrepreneurship to flourish. So that applied learning that both Chris and Ian talked about, that support that enables you to complete the learning cycle. So if something goes wrong or you fail, you've got somebody that steps in and helps you to reflect on how would you do that differently next time. I think that's really crucial when it comes to entrepreneurship.
Chris?
No, I agree with a lot of that. Ian, going back to your question around can you spot the entrepreneur in a room, I was tempted to say they're all theoretically entrepreneurs. It's just we haven't yet switched that on yet. And can you teach entrepreneurship? Yes. I mean, I think first of all you start with enterprise. So I think the funnel starts with enterprise skills. And it's about exploring ideas and possibly failing, but learning from failing and having a safe environment for that. It is about experience and an insight, but ultimately at the edge that it becomes self-employment. It's about putting the scaffolding in for that. I would also say one other thing about schools, because I do think there's something quite profound there. I've worked in secondary schools, state secondary schools. And we're very used in our system to talking the language of grades. We're very good at saying you're a B-star student, you're on for an A, you're on track for a C. We very rarely will say you've demonstrated leadership today. You've been a great communicator today. And I think because that's not the language that a lot of our pupils hear every day, particularly the kind of students we're talking about, they don't own that or believe that or would use that language. So, I do think there's something about just affirming the value of things and spotlighting and celebrating them that goes beyond the language we currently use in our state schools.
I want to round things up now and go to each of you and ask you how you think we can measure if levelling up by extending sort of entrepreneurialism enterprise is actually working, is actually happening. And I'll come to Justine last to sum up the whole the last hour. Ian, if I can come to you first here, how do you think we can, whether we're making a bit of an impact as an economy, as a society?
Yes, thank you. I mean, I would simply say, from my perspective, and I'll speak from a Liverpool John Moores perspective, what I'm really interested to know is how many of our students actually do go into actually the enterprise environment and setting up business. And for me, that's the measure of success, if you like. You can look at all sorts of different metrics that as a university we are obliged to do in terms of where our graduates go to. And that, of course, has merits. But what's really of interest to me, it's a bit like if you go back to what Justine said earlier on about actually if our students are creating a business, they might not be generating a lot of income by the time they leave us. And in terms of the league tables that will be come out around graduate outcomes, for us, that actually won't fare us too well. But what we know we're doing is we're doing the right things for our students and where we come from in order to that level up agenda. And for me, from an extending enterprise perspective, it is simply, are more of our students who come into Liverpool John Moores University going out as entrepreneurs compared to year on year where we're going. So each year that we're developing and increasing the number of students who are going out and trying to set up our business. And I just add one thing that surprised me, and that is this year we've had an increase of about 10% during the pandemic who are interested in starting up their own business. I think that's absolutely fascinating and something that we internally are focused on, about how do we stimulate that and allow those students to actually continue on their journey. And if you like, I see that very much as part of that levelling up agenda and helping regeneration in the city and the city region and indeed beyond.
Sharon.
Say that really focus on that lower half of the IMD areas and look to really measure whether we're making some progress there. And in terms of the factors, obviously we'd look at young people considering a startup, look at young people's access to meaningful opportunities as defined by them, young people's access to relatable role models, and obviously within those lower 5 IMD areas, startups, SMEs, employing people, I would think that those would be the key factors really in terms of extending enterprise.
Chris.
Yeah, so I mean, just to start with, as Ian mentioned, we do have all kinds of measurables as universities. The key one is the graduate outcome survey. As it happens, questions are asked in that survey about whether graduates are self-employed. If they are, what's their company house registration? How was it funded? Did they receive support from the university? It's just occurred to me in the conversation, I've never seen that data. So we have that on a mass scale nationally. And I've never seen that data, which would be fascinating to know what that looks like. I think I'd go broader and reference Sharon's point, which is I think there's something very interesting about geography here. You know, are we seeing an equality of business startup, particularly amongst young people? You know, we're very used to starting to look at organizations and the top flight of organizations and decision makers in terms of gender, in terms of cultural background, in terms of increasingly class background. But are we looking at business owners? Are we looking at freelance workers in the same way? It'd be really interesting to see whether, again, there is a parity of those who've made the leap, because I think in terms of leveling up, that's almost the ultimate measure. You know, is there equality of opportunity and impact here?
Well, Justine, I think of all the seminars that we've done in this series, I think we've done, what, a dozen of them so far, if not more. I think that this is the one that I would just love every 18-year-old in the country to watch, because I think it might set off to think, well, I'm going to start a business, and that would great happen. Just sum up the discussion for us.
I think, first of all, it's really underlined how important entrepreneurship is for levelling up and extending opportunity. Everyone talks about talent spread evenly, opportunities not, but actually part of how you get opportunity created is brand new businesses being set up. I think the other thing that really came through from all of the discussion was how learning about entrepreneurship is fundamentally often learning about those key skills that are going to help you get on in your life whatever career you want to do, whether it's starting a business or going to work for someone else, because it is about communication. It's about numeracy and financial skills. It's about problem solving. It's about putting together teams. It's about how you present all of that and make your case. So this enterprising mindset, I think, as Sharon rightly called it, is really important, whatever you're going to go on and do. I think there were some important points that came out of it around the practicalities of access to capital that really do need to be reflected on in wider society. You know, I remember having the discussion at the DFE that, you know, we had to recognize we were willing to lend £50,000 to a young person who wanted to do this route in life called a degree. But actually, if they wanted to do other stuff, then that was totally off the agenda. So I think there is an issue around making sure that access to capital isn't a barrier. But from my perspective, it is really exciting, Ian. And actually, you know, you made the point that it's never been easier in a way to get a business off the ground. And I think one of the actions, in a sense, that I take for myself and ourselves on the panel, we're all part of this levelling up work, is to put our heads together and work out actually whether we can bring our coalition of the willing that we've got doing all this social mobility, levelling up work, and really see what we can do working together to crack some of those barriers that have come up in the discussion today.
Well, thank you very much, Justine, and thanks to Chris Finn, Sharon Davis and Ian Campbell, and to John Moores University for co-hosting this seminar with us. If you missed any of the seminars, you can find them on the Levelling Up Goals website, and join us again next time. Goodbye.